Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd. And oh my god, oh my god, what have they done? It's now confirmed that New Trek is a totally separate universe. There's no other explanation. It's totally separate. It's not Star Trek, it's Star Trek, it's a parody. So, calm down. It's okay. I'm okay. There is some good stuff in it. Well, like one good minute in all of this. The joke they did with that punk from the voyage home being asked politely by Kirk to turn it down a little bit, then showing him the finger, and then Spock neck pinching him, and everyone on the bus cheers. That was a very funny scene, highlighting the differences between people of the future and people of today. And now we have Raffi and Seven sitting on a bus in 2024, and we hear the same kind of music. It's not the exact same song, it's an updated one, and the lyrics are 35 years later, and things are still the same, something like that. And we see the same guy. It actually is the same actor who played him, so I will give them points for that. And the scene was kind of funny, to me at least, even though it was extremely silly, extremely unrealistic, you would say. And also I think it could have been done in a funnier way. I think it would have been funnier if Raffi just went up to that guy and snapped his neck again. That probably would have been even funnier. But they just asked him politely to turn it down, and then he kind of touches his neck as if remembering what Spock did to him, and then turned it off and apologized. So he's now a beta male because all the males are weak and cowardly in the New Trek universe. So he just turns it off immediately and apologizes. So it is a very stupid scene, but it is kind of funny, so I will give them points for that. That was the only scene I actually enjoyed in this episode. The rest of the episode was basically as if someone tied me up in a dentist chair and was pulling my eyes out like what they did to Icheb. That's how I felt like watching this episode. It made me want to rip my eyes out of their sockets. Every single minute of this episode had a bunch of stupid stuff in them. First of all, it's now confirmed they indeed crash landed in France, right next to Picard's house. So when he said home, he didn't just mean France in general. He literally meant his own home, his own house. So he precisely landed next to his house. So I guess he knew no one lives there at that time period. So I guess that explains that away, because it would have been even sillier without this explanation. So they say that they have no power on the ship. They could just barely beam people to LA on the other side of the planet, beaming through the entire planet, and yet they don't have enough power for the communicators to communicate with them properly. But they do have power for a clocking device, but they don't have power for the heating system, so they need to go into Picard's old house to light up a fire. They cannot hit themselves any other way, even though they have phasers and stuff like that on the ship, but no, they cannot hit themselves up. Or more precisely, Jurati is freezing. Like, Picard seems to be fine, maybe because he's a robot, even though he is apparently an organic robot. He has blood in the previous episode and all of that. So they cannot make up their mind. There's even a scene in this episode when Rios says that he doesn't understand the whole part about Picard being a robot, because no one can explain it to him. So anyway, despite having a bunch of phasers on the ship, despite having enough power for a clocking device and for beaming people to the other side of the planet, but they cannot hit Jurati up. They don't have enough blankets, I guess, on this ship, which is supposed to be a ship that, you know, can survive the vacuum of space, so you would think it would have better heat isolation, like you wouldn't freeze so quickly in the night. At least the only thing they got right is that it's nighttime in France while it's daytime in LA. So at least that, even though it's been so long, they've been going all over LA for hours and it's still the same exact lighting, and so it's still a little bit fishy, but at least it's dark in France while it's daylight in LA. So I'm still wondering how the hell did he manage to crash the ship on the absolute other side of the planet while in the middle of the crashing. I guess maybe the cloaking device is actually a phase cloak. Maybe he actually activated the phase cloak while falling down, and that's how he ended up on the other side of the planet. I can always come up with excuses. If I think hard enough, I will come up with some convoluted theory to explain almost everything. There is something in this episode which is a lot more difficult to explain. I will get to it very soon, I promise. But anyway, so they go into Picard's house, which is abandoned, and he says that it's been abandoned since the Second World War because his family ran away from the Nazis. So I guess Picard's family are Jewish or something, because he said they would not have survived if they hadn't escaped occupied France, and they went to live in England. And they lived there for many generations before they came back. So I guess that's this show's attempt to explain why Picard and his family all have British accents. His family actually lived in England for many generations. I almost expected him to say that they also changed their names to Xavier for a while. Like, that would have been an even funnier tie-in, I think. And it's so ridiculous that when he goes into the house, he kind of touches stuff, and it makes him have flashbacks of his childhood in which the same exact objects are in the house. So you're telling me that the same furniture existed in the house for 400 years? It's been here since the Second World War at least, and it remained in perfect condition until the 24th century? And it once again makes him having flashbacks of his childhood abuse, that his mother played him that song that we heard in the first episode, that famous French song that it made him calm down and all of that. That's the one he heard when he saw the Borg Queen. So then Jurati starts touching stuff, and she randomly picks the number 15 from all kinds of places, and Picard notices it, and they make a reference to Dixon Hill, that he's such a brilliant detective, so it's like their Sherlock. So she calls him Dixon Hill because he figures out that her subconscious mind is giving them the number 15 as the date in which it's too late to change the future. That's the day the Borg Queen brought them to, because even though the Borg Queen actively helped them get to this time period in order for them to fix the future, which is what she wants as well, because in the alternate future all the Borg were destroyed. That's why she agreed to help them to save the past, to restore the proper future, because it will also save most of the Borg, except all the ones Janeway killed, I guess, but all the other ones who are still alive, she would save them. But once they arrived in the past, the Borg Queen no longer is willing to help them. They have to force the information out of her now, because now she doesn't want to help them anymore, even though she's the one who brought them here to this time, to this date, because it's her interest as well to help them, but now she doesn't want to help them, unless Jurati plays games with her or something. Like, the Borg Queen is now the bored queen because she's so bored, because she's so lonely and being without the collective, that she needs to play mind games with someone. And so she's being like Hannibal Lecter playing games with Clarice in Silence of the Lambs. That's how the bored queen is behaving with Jurati. She's only willing to help them if Jurati gives her some sad stories or something like that. It's like a Hannibal Lecter kind of ripoff with the bored queen, because she's now so bored out of her mind from being in the show that she refuses to help them in any way unless Jurati plays with her, basically. So she's now the bored queen, and in the previous episode Jurati had to go into her mind to extract information, but it's in her subconscious, so now she's randomly picking up numbers by picking up a bottle which says 1915. That's how Picard figures out, oh, the number 15, and you touched something there, and that was also 15, so that means we have to change the past by the date of 15. And then she says, you're like Dixon Hill, you're so brilliant. I guess maybe he noticed it because he's an android now he's so clever, now, he doesn't freeze to death. And then they get some coordinates, and despite having no power left in the ship for heating, they manage to beam Picard to Guinan's bar in the 10 Forward Street. So that was kind of funny and kind of made sense back in the 24th century, because I assumed Guinan picked that location, that address, as kind of a joke because she used to be in 10 Forward on the ship, and that was called that because it was on deck 10 in the forward section of the ship with the best view and all of that. That's why it was called 10 Forward. So I assume when she retired and moved to Earth, she just picked that address as kind of a joke and made her bar there so that she can call her bar 10 Forward. But now it's all in the past, long before she was ever on the Enterprise, and yet she's still the owner of the bar in the same place in 10 Forward Street. And Picard goes there, and then he goes in, and he sees a bottle which is similar to Soren brandy, I guess. I guess maybe it is Soren brandy. And then a black woman comes in, and it's not Whoopi Goldberg. She looks nothing like her, I guess, except for the shaved eyebrows, because Whoopi Goldberg was always shaving her eyebrows for some reason, or plucking them out, I don't know. So this woman also has shaved eyebrows, and she looks nothing like Whoopi Goldberg. And then Picard says, Guinan? Isn't that kind of racist? She literally has nothing in common with Guinan except being black, and he assumes it must be Guinan. So for a moment I thought she's going to say, oh, that's my mom, or that's my sister, or something like that, that they will somehow make them related, and that way have a Guinan kind of character without it actually being Guinan. But no, she actually is Guinan, despite the fact that Q said that her name wasn't Guinan centuries ago, that she changed her name and whatever. So I guess in the 19th century, in the episode Time's Arrow, she was also called Guinan. So maybe she lived on Earth up until 2024. I guess it's possible, even though in that episode Time's Arrow, she specifically said when that arrived and she thought that her father sent him, she told him to go back and tell him that she didn't finish listening to humanity or something. So it made it sound as if she was just planning to be on Earth for a little while. And yet apparently she was on Earth until the 21st century. I guess it leaves enough wiggle time for her to go back to her own planet in time to witness the Borg destroying it, because remember, she was a refugee from her planet back in the 23rd century, so she must have come back there at some point. So she didn't live on Earth all this while, and yet the bar in 10 Forward stayed a bar, I guess, for centuries, which makes absolutely no sense. And when we saw her in the 19th century, she looked exactly like Whoopi Goldberg in the 24th century, but somewhere in the middle, I guess she transformed into a totally different looking woman for some reason. I guess maybe it's supposed to be a younger version of her. Maybe she made herself look younger at some point, because it's been established now that El-Orients can make themselves look whatever age they want, and apparently also able to change their faces. The only thing similar to that in TNG was when Q said that Guinan is not what she appears to be, she's an imp and stuff like that. So I guess maybe Guinan does have some kind of power. That could have been so useful at the time of TNG when the ship was in danger at so many times. How come Guinan never helped them out in any way if she has all these amazing powers, except the time that she saved the timeline? And they kind of reference that as well by revealing that it actually is an inherited trait of the entire species of El-Orients. So the fact that they can sense alternate timelines is indeed, as Data speculated, something that all her species are capable of, which I think is a dumb idea, because I much prefer the other theories, such as the fact that her ability to sense the alternate timeline was simply a result of her being part of that time loop in Time's Arrow. The fact that she met Picard in the far past, and he saved her in that cave, and maybe he told her a little bit about the future, and so when the time came that she was on the Enterprise D, she knew what it's supposed to be like. So when everything changed in yesterday's Enterprise and it didn't fit the description that she knew from Picard she met in the past to what he told her, maybe that's what made her sense the fact that everything is different. Another possible theory is that it's due to her being stuck in the Nexus, that part of her is still in the Nexus, as was said in Star Trek Generations, and the Nexus exists outside of linear time, so maybe that's what gave her those powers to sense alternate timelines. So there are much better theories to explain away her ability to sense it when the timeline changes, but now it's established it's just a trait of her species. And for some reason she doesn't recognize Picard, despite the fact that she met him in the 19th century and he told her about the future. Now a century later she meets Picard in LA and doesn't recognize him. And I didn't immediately hate it, because I assumed, oh, maybe they're actually being clever. Maybe it will simply take it a while for her to remember him, because it's been a whole century and he aged quite a bit, so he doesn't look exactly the same. And remember, she only expects to meet him again when he will be around the same age as she knew him in the 19th century, so she doesn't expect an older Picard to show up, and she probably have seen thousands of old bald men in her lifetime, so she cannot think of any bald man that it might be the same guy that she only saw for a brief while back in the 19th century, and she didn't keep any photos of him. So it's not beyond my suspension of disbelief to assume that she wouldn't immediately recognize Picard when she meets him, and they even made a point of him not to say his name. And so I thought, okay, it's going to get later, so they're waiting for it a little bit, and then later on she will remember him as the guy she met in the 19th century, and yet it never happens. And so apparently both of them don't remember that incident. So it's obvious the writers themselves just don't know about it. They never watched that episode. So oh, this is the biggest plot hole I've seen maybe in all of Star Trek, in the entire franchise. Like, there's never been that glaring of a plot hole ever. I mean, they knew about Al-Orians not aging and all of that. They knew all of that, so they must have known that she lived on Earth in the 19th century and met Picard. They forgot that they met Picard. Patrick Stewart himself, who played that scene, how can he not remember the fact that he met Guinan in the 19th century when he filmed that episode? I guess he's gone senile, I guess. I did see some interviews of him in which he doesn't even remember what century Star Trek is set in. I think he said he's in the 26th century in one interview. So as I was watching the scene, I kept waiting for them to reference it. I kept waiting for at least some kind of clue, a sign that he would look familiar to her, or at least that he will have remembered it, that he will be curious how come she doesn't recognize him. Some kind of little clue. No, there was nothing. So the writers simply forgot all about it. So this confirms that this entire show is set in a completely different universe from the old Star Trek shows. It's not in the same canon, it's not the same continuity, there is no connection, except some of the same actors. And even the behavior of this new Guinan is nothing like the Guinan that we know, because the old Guinan, the one we saw in TNG, and even when she was back in the 19th century, she was always very calm, very soft-spoken, very wise, very patient, and all of that. And yet this new Guinan that we see here is a nervous wreck, and she's basically crazy, and she pulls out a rifle and points at Picard and all of that. And she behaves nothing like the Guinan we know. The only example of something similar was in that episode in TNG, Night Terrors, when the entire crew went crazy because they couldn't have any dreams, they didn't have REM sleep, and so everyone on the ship went nuts, including Guinan, who at one point pulled out a rifle and started shooting things in the bar to stop the bar fight. And so that was kind of similar to that, but that was a crazy Guinan in an episode in which everyone went crazy. And yet here we see Guinan also pull out a rifle and almost killing Picard because he dared to come into her bar. I guess he said that he knows she's a El-Orian, and so that's what made her pull a gun out. How come she doesn't simply assume that her father sent this guy, just as she did with Data? When Data showed up and told her he's an android, she didn't go all scared. She wasn't reacting with fear and aggression. She simply said, oh, so my father must have sent you. So how come when Picard mentions that she's an alien, she gets so scared and defensive? So what's the deal? Did the galaxy become much more aggressive suddenly? Suddenly any alien visitors must be hostile in her mind, despite the fact that her dog likes Picard. She has the same kind of dog that Picard has in the future, because Patrick Stewart loves those kinds of dogs, so he insists on having those dogs on the set all the time just because he likes them, even though it has absolutely no purpose in the story. And so the dog smells that he's no threat, and that's how Guinan calms down and doesn't shoot him. And then she starts talking about losing faith in humanity because humanity is so evil, and that's why she's quitting humanity and she's going out into space, going back to her own planet because humanity is so evil and all of that. And that also pissed me off because she lived on Earth for a century, right? If she's been on Earth all this time, so that means she must have witnessed slavery and fascism and all the things that humanity did overcome by this time period. So she must know that humanity is improving and is defeating all its evils and all of that. So how come she now suddenly loses faith in humanity in 2024, when the world is much better than it was in the decades before it? So what the hell are they even talking about? So it's once again inserting all kinds of agendas in a stupid way which doesn't fit. It makes no sense if Guinan lived on Earth all this time and she witnessed slavery, she witnessed the Nazis, she witnessed all the horrors of humanity and didn't leave Earth. And only now in 2024, suddenly she lost faith in humanity for no reason, and she even says to Picard that someone like you, someone who looks like you, can have the patience, but someone who looks like me is being treated so horribly by society, and so I'm quitting the planet and I'm leaving. And I'm thinking, like, what the hell are you talking about? She's seriously complaining about racism in 2024, and she says humanity is killing their own planet, and there are a few billionaires who could have fixed the planet, but they don't because they care about their money too much. And so this is basically kind of pushing all the agendas into the show, and we have the whole subplot with Rios. Half the episode is about Rios being in a concentration camp, I guess a death camp, because they say that he's going to disappear. They don't say that they're kicking him out to another country. They actually say that he's going to disappear, so it's as if he's going to a death camp or something for being an illegal immigrant, and so he's being abused for half the episode by the evil American guards, I guess. And so half the episode is about that. I'm not even going to talk about that because that was simply so boring I can't even remember what happened there. If we compare that to that Deep Space Nine episode Past Tense, which was about the Bell Riots, which was around this same time period, but in that episode it wasn't about racism at all. They even made a point in that episode when they showed the rich people, they showed that the rich people are of all the races. And so it was no longer about race. The ones who got thrown into the camps were of all races. They were only thrown there because they were poor, basically, without a job. They put all the homeless people into ghettos, basically, and the rich people were also shown to be of all races. So it was no longer about race, it was about different social issues of class and all of that. So it's a different kind of injustice. And yet in this episode, it's all back about race. And so Guinan complains about being mistreated for being black, and Rios is getting thrown into a death camp for being Hispanic, and as if he's going to disappear, that's what they say, as if he's going to get killed off and executed. When in reality, I'm assuming that's not the case, that he's simply going to get deported since he went into the country illegally, so it's not been mentioned in the episode. They never say they're deporting people who came into the country illegally. They seem to say he's been arrested because he's Hispanic and he's been sent to a death camp. That's how they make it seem like in the episode. And all the evil guards are evil for no reason and abusing and tasering people for no reason for half the episode, basically. And Guinan is complaining about people of color being mistreated and humanity poisoning its own planet, and rich people are to blame for everything because they could have fixed all the problems but they refuse to because they're so selfish, and that's why she decides to leave the planet. And then Picard tells her, "No, Guinan, please don't leave. I need you to save the future. Don't give up on humanity. Humanity will improve. It will not be like this anymore in the future." And I kept thinking, what the hell are you talking about? Because in season 1 of Picard, just a year ago, we saw that in the future it's exactly the same. In your wonderful Federation of the Kurtzman Trek, they showed us that humanity refused to save the Romulans. That Picard said half the admirals didn't want to save the Romulans from the supernova. They refused to rescue the Romulans. They never wanted to save the Romulans. That Starfleet gave in to intolerance and fears. That was his words in the previous season. So humanity in the future in this Kurtzman universe is exactly the same. So what the hell is he talking about when he says humanity will improve, it will no longer be like this in the future, when obviously it is still like that in the Kurtzman Trek, of course. Unlike in the original Trek shows in TNG, you remember when Mark Twain in that same episode, Times Arrow, when he came to the future, he was so amazed that in the future there is no injustice, that there is no slavery, that the aliens serving on the ship are not slaves as he assumed in the beginning. The only thing he didn't like in that future is that there are no cigars anymore, and he was frustrated that he cannot smoke a cigar. And of course in the Kurtzman Trek everyone are smoking in the future, and we saw Captain Rios smoking on the bridge of his ship, having a cigar in his mouth all the time in the Starfleet ship in the Kurtzman Trek. So why the hell couldn't they give a cigar to Mark Twain when he visited the future if it's in the same future? So the obvious explanation is that these are two separate universes. So the one from TNG, the one which was enlightened and beautiful in the future, is not the same as the Kurtzman future in which everyone are cursing and smoking and there's intolerance and they don't rescue the Romulan refugees in that future. So what the hell is Picard talking about when he tells Guinan that humanity will evolve and change, when it's obviously not true in this Kurtzman universe, in which Guinan never met Picard in the 19th century, so this confirms it's not in the same continuity. There is no other explanation. Unless, I guess, maybe Will Smith neuralized Guinan at some point when he was in Men in Black. At some point he ran into Guinan, realized she's an alien, and wiped out all her memories with a neuralizer, and that's why she cannot remember meeting Picard in the 19th century. There is no other explanation, and even Picard himself no longer remembers it for some reason. He never tells her, "How come you cannot recognize me? We met a century ago, don't you remember? I did age a little bit since then, but it's me, it's Jean-Luc Picard." She did kind of recognize his name, so maybe there is some glimmer of hope that they didn't completely forget all about it, and maybe they will explain it somehow. Maybe they will say that because the future changed into a new timeline, so maybe Picard and Data never went back to the past, and maybe that's why she never met him in the past either, which would ruin a perfectly good closed time loop that we had in TNG. That was one of the only examples of a perfect time travel story in which all the loose ends were perfectly tied. There are no logical problems with what we saw in Time's Arrow. And also, if that never happened, then who ever stopped those aliens who were sucking out people's souls out in the 19th century? If not for that time loop, that means those aliens kept doing that for centuries and killing off a bunch of people, so wouldn't that have changed the timeline drastically as well? So this is obviously a totally different universe now. No matter what they do now in 2024, it must be totally different. And it's funny how Raffi and Seven steal a car and they drive around the city, causing multiple car crashes, like interrupting the lives of multiple people, causing multiple people to be late for work because of the chaos they created, and that is not creating any problems with the timeline. And to break into the car, Raffi used the same weapon that she vaporized all those men in the previous episode with, and so that means she can adjust the setting that it doesn't vaporize the entire car, it only breaks the window. So it does have some settings, and so why did they vaporize those men in the previous episode with no remorse whatsoever? And so now they steal a police car to try to look for a Rios, and then they drive around being chased by police and causing crashes and all of that chaos, which must have disrupted the lives of hundreds of people who got late to work or didn't go on their dates, and so their entire schedule was disrupted, causing a chain effect of different kind of events and changing the entire timeline of the future, which totally goes against all the rules of time travel, of course. And it's really funny that they could have simply used the bus. I guess they didn't want to meet another punk who would play loud music. That was too traumatic for them, and so that's why they decided to steal a police car instead and drive it around the city in the opposite lane and cause multiple car crashes. Guinan goes away because Picard is unable to convince her. Even though he knows everything about her, they've been best friends for a century and all of that, and yet he's unable to convince her. So that was pathetic. But she does agree to take him to the Watcher, which she says there are some sort of alien creatures which protect the destinies of individuals on all kinds of planets, so they're like guardian angels, and so the good guys basically, right? And yet for some reason she's scared of the Watcher. The Watcher is very scary for some reason, but she agrees to take Picard to the Watcher, and the Watcher is like possessing people, being inside different people, and then he meets the real Watcher, which turns out to be Laris. Which was very obvious because in the very start of the episode, when they showed the previously on compilation, they actually showed a scene of her for absolutely no reason, and so I immediately knew she's going to show up in the episode. They had to remind the audience of who she was, otherwise they wouldn't get the surprise, the shock reveal in the end of the episode, which is totally ridiculous. Why would it be her at all? Makes absolutely no sense. It's contrived, it's silly, it's nonsense, it's simply stupid in every way. No matter how they try to explain it, it would still be stupid. And so Laris is the Watcher, and she appears to be looking like a human without the Romulan ears. And then she and Picard beam somewhere in a puff of smoke, and that's the end of the episode. And right before that, she also wants to take away his communicator, and he doesn't want to let go of his communicator. And then she tells him, at least take the batteries out. And then he does. He literally takes batteries out of the communicator, and that made me facepalm really hard as well, because I specifically remember some of the behind the scenes stuff from TNG, in which the actress who played Vash said that when she was filming the episode Captain's Holiday on Ryside, they were filming a scene in which she was trying to scan something with the tricorder and couldn't pick out anything, and she said that she improvised and had some kind of a funny joke that she thought they would keep in, that she was saying that maybe the batteries don't work in the tricorder, and they stopped everything, they stopped all the filming, and they came to her and told her, it's the 24th century, there are no longer batteries in this future. And then she felt really silly and she was embarrassed and all of that, but now it turns out there are batteries in the future, that all their equipment works with batteries. And I suddenly remember a scene in Star Trek Insurrection in which Data said that he never has to recharge because his energy cells are eternal, something like that, that his energy cells continue to regenerate themselves, that he doesn't have to replace his batteries. They never really explained it, but you would assume in the far future they wouldn't have to replace batteries in their devices, and so having that option at all seems kind of ridiculous, but apparently now there are batteries inside com badges. I think we saw something like that in Lower Decks as well, so it's not a huge deal, but it's still kind of something silly, something that makes the amazing future technology of the Federation seem like something from today. The replicator food tastes like shit, toilets still use water to flush, as was mentioned in Star Trek Discovery in the 32nd century. And so everything in New Trek is basically like today. People are still nasty in the future, still cursing in the future, and all of those nasty things in the previous season. So it's absolutely ridiculous to then try to insert all these moments of saying, oh, it's all about saving the environment, or it's all about stopping injustice in humanity, and all of that falls flat because of the contrast of what we saw even in the future of the Kurtzman Star Trek. And so all of this is absolutely ridiculous. The only scene I actually enjoyed was the one with the punk on the bus, and even that I enjoyed only because the original scene is so good, because the original scene is so funny that any reference to it would also be funny, which is exactly the difference between old Trek, which is still memorable decades later, compared to the new Trek, which doesn't have almost no real memorable original stuff at all, and is only relying on ripping off or imitating or making jokes out of the old stuff and other movies and all of that. So anyway, that's my thoughts about all of this. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.